Hey everyone, welcome back. Hope you're having a fantastic day so far. So with just 3 days to go before the United States officially defaults on our debts, late last night the Senate was finally able to pass a bill to raise the debt ceiling after the House passed it the day before. So they actually moved this thing through a lot closer. And of course, now that we've raised the debt ceiling, we now avoid all those terrible economic consequences that would have taken place, such as Social Security payments possibly being delayed. So this, of course, is very good news. Now, in addition to that, more payments are going out to certain beneficiaries of Social Security today. Those are going to be right around $1,800 on average. We're going to be discussing who is going to be receiving those payments, and then we're going to be looking ahead, of course, at the payment schedule for the rest of the month of June, which we went over yesterday, and of course, in the months ahead in July. Now, before I go ahead and dive into the main content of today's video, if you wouldn't mind helping me out real quickly by just giving this video a like, that just helps out with the good old YouTube algorithm, and also consider subscribing to my channel if you have not already. Okay, so as I just mentioned, of course, the debt ceiling was passed through the Senate last night. Of course, the bill was. So at this point, it is going to land on President Joe Biden's desk to be signed into law. That should be signed into law today, which is, of course, going to avoid the United States from defaulting on our debts. So now we're not going to have those millions of jobs lost that we would have lost if we did default on our debts. The timely payments of Social Security should continue going out, so this is very good news as well. And of course, Americans are not going to lose millions and billions of dollars in the stock market through their retirement accounts, such as their 401ks and IRAs. So of course, that is very good news as well. Now, of course, once it reached the Senate yesterday, they did have to vote on different amendments. There were several different amendments. Most of them were voted no. However, one of them, which is very significant for millions of Americans, was actually voted yes on, but President Joe Biden may actually veto that amendment. We're going to be discussing that as well. This was actually expected to be held up for maybe a few different days because some people didn't like this bill, and they thought if they held it up long enough, maybe it would change. And the fear was that they would actually hold this bill up long enough where they would not pass it on time of that June 5th deadline. But at the end of the day, they actually passed this very quickly, a lot quicker than I thought they would. They passed it last night. I was thinking maybe this would drag through the weekend and drag out to the very last second, but they were actually able to get this thing done a lot quicker than I thought. Now, it's probably because they just wanted to go home for the weekend rather than, dragging this out and being in DC through the weekend. They probably wanted to be home with their family this weekend, but they were able to finally get it done, and get it done actually on a pretty timely basis, even though we did wait until 3 days before defaulting on our debts. So, according to CNBC, Senate passes bill to raise debt ceiling, preventing first ever U.S. default. So the Senate late Thursday passed a House-approved bill to raise the debt ceiling and cap government spending for 2 years, sending the legislation to President Joe Biden's desk. He is expected to sign it Friday and address the nation at 7 p.m. Eastern Time, just 3 days before the U.S. risked its first ever sovereign debt default. The compromise debt ceiling bill passed the Senate by a 63-36 margin, enough support from Democrats and Republicans to overcome the chamber's 60-vote threshold to avoid a filibuster. But the party breakdown was not even. The majority of Senate Republicans, 31 senators, voted against the debt ceiling bill, while just 17 GOP senators supported it. On the left, only 4 Democrats and Vermont Independent Senator Bernie Sanders voted to sink the bill, while the other 46 members of the Democratic caucus voted for it. Biden and McCarthy both claimed the outcome as a victory. McCarthy because he had passed new work requirements for some federal aid, a 2-year government spending cap, and a clawback of unspent COVID funds. So a lot of people are saying this is very interesting that we actually had more Democrats in both the House and the Senate voting in approval of the bill. And then, of course, in the Senate, we actually had more Republicans opposing the bill than supporting it. Now, a lot of Republicans were against this bill because even though it was, Speaker Kevin McCarthy actually got a lot of what he wanted, a lot of the spending cuts from Joe Biden, a lot of Republicans feel like they didn't get nearly enough cuts in there that they wanted. So they voted no, which of course, if enough of them voted no, we could have defaulted on our debts. Now, I think a lot of Democrats actually voted yes in approval of this bill, not because they necessarily like the fact that we're going to have all the spending cuts and new work requirements for those aged between 50 to 54 to receive SNAP benefits. I think they more so voted yes because the alternative of voting no, of course, would have meant us defaulting on our debts, which would have had a lot of worse economic consequences. Like I mentioned, there would have been millions, billions, possibly trillions of dollars wiped out in the stock market, which of course is not just the wealthiest of the wealthy with money in the stock market. It's regular people with 401ks from their job. It's people who have IRAs that contribute to that, retirement accounts. People would have lost a lot of money in that. It's possible that millions of jobs would have been lost. And like I mentioned also, it's very possible that Social Security payments could have been delayed. Not sure if that would have been 1 day, 2 days, possibly a week or 2 weeks. Nobody really knew. It was unfamiliar territory. So really the alternative, even though they didn't like all the spending cuts in there, they still voted yes just because they did not want a default to happen. So like I mentioned, also there were some amendments voted on in the Senate that were passed through the House. Most of those, pretty much all of those actually were voted no in the Senate. However, one very significant one actually ended up passing, although Joe Biden said he was actually going to veto that amendment, and it's unlikely they're going to have enough votes to overturn his veto. So, according to The Hill, Senate passes measure to halt Biden's student debt forgiveness. So, the Democratic-led Senate handed a stinging rebuke to President Biden on Thursday, passing a measure that overturns his student debt relief plan to give 40 million borrowers up to $20,000 in loan forgiveness, though a presidential veto is likely on the way. The Senate passed the measure in a 52-46 vote just days after it cleared the GOP majority House. Democratic Senators John Tester and Joe Manchin and Independent Senator Kirsten Sinema joined Republicans in voting to nix Biden's proposal. The White House has made it clear a veto is coming, and neither chamber can provide the 2/3 vote to override. Biden's proposal, however, is still at the mercy of the conservative-leaning Supreme Court, which seemed highly skeptical of it during oral arguments earlier on this year. So, like they mentioned, even though they were able to clear this through both the House and the Senate to overturn Biden's executive order to forgive up to $20,000 of student loan forgiveness, it's unlikely they're going to have 2/3 vote in both the House and the Senate to overturn this, just because pretty much all Democrats, except those couple of them that actually voted against this, are going to vote in favor of it. However, like they also mentioned, this is currently in the Supreme Court, and right now it's more than likely going to get struck down in the Supreme Court. That means that if you have student loans and you were hoping that this would pass through the Supreme Court and that Biden's executive order would go through and you would have up to $20,000 worth of student loan forgiveness on the way, unfortunately, it looks like that's not going to happen. But in some other news, of course, today there are going to be some more payments going out to Social Security recipients. Those on average are going to be up to around $1,800, possibly more, possibly less. So according to here, on June 2nd, of course, payees who began receiving payments before May of 1997, or if you're receiving both Social Security and SSI, of course, you would be receiving your payment today. Now, normally you receive this payment on the 3rd of every month, but since the 3rd of this month in June is actually going to be falling on a Saturday, you're just going to be receiving that payment a little bit earlier. Now, like I mentioned in yesterday's video, there are going to be some more payments going out this month of June. Those are going to be on June 14th, June 21st, and June 28th, depending on your birth date, as you can see up on the screen. And then on June 30th, recipients of SSI are going to be receiving the second payment in the month of June. This is actually just going to be your July payment because July 1st falls on a Saturday. And anytime the first of a month falls on a Saturday, a Sunday, or a holiday, you're just going to be receiving your payment a little bit earlier. So you can see the calendar up on the screen here. And of course, looking ahead to July, as you can see on July 1st, you're not going to be receiving your SSI payment. Your July SSI payment is going to be coming on the 30th of June. And then there's going to be payments going out on July 3rd, July 12th, 19th, and 26th. And then the next SSI payment is going to be going out on August 1st. And then, of course, once again in September, recipients of SSI are going to be receiving two payments, September 1st and September 29th. That's because October 1st is going to be falling on a Sunday, so your October payment is going to be coming in the latter parts of September. So that's all the news that we have for today's video. I certainly hope that you enjoyed. If you did, again, I would greatly appreciate if you could give this video a like. Consider subscribing to my channel if you have not already, and I will see you in the next video.